You're listening to the Hour of the Time. This is Pooh, and I've got something to say for you, Birdman. Hi, Birdman.
And I'm William Cooper.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the last issue of Veritas, our headline story concerned the BATF and the Internal Revenue Service. Now, I know that many of the listening audience are not subscribers to Veritas, and shame on you. Tonight, I'm going to deliver that message to you, and I'm going to tell you how to get Veritas, because in every issue, there are articles which can change your life and educate you to the point where you will join us in our efforts to restore this nation, restore the Constitution for the United States of America as the supreme law of the land, restore the Bill of Rights. And believe me, we need all the help we can get. You're going to see in the coming months a more concerted effort to destroy the traditional values of the American people. You're going to hear the word patriot disappear from the vocabulary of most Americans. That word will be so propagandized that most of the sheeple will not want to use it or to refer to themselves as patriots. For just as I wrote in my book, ladies and gentlemen, 5 years ago, patriots will be dubbed terrorists. You're seeing a great shift in that direction now. And patriotism will be considered to be a mental illness. And that's not all. I can tell you right now that the 96 election is over with. It's already finished, ladies and gentlemen. The establishment has decided who's going to be president. I'm not going to tell you tonight, but stay tuned to the Hour of the Time, because I will tell you who that will be shortly. Just waiting for one little more piece of input. And then I can tell you exactly, just as I told you in the last election, who will be the next president of the United States. Remember, a year before the last election, I told you that it was not guesswork, that I did not consult a psychic. God does not whisper in my ear, although I wish sometimes that he would. I told you that William Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, would definitely, without any doubt, be the next president of the United States. I knew it, ladies and gentlemen. I knew it because the establishment elite, the people who decide these things, told me. This election, if there is an election, has already been decided. And now, for tonight's broadcast. Make sure you listen carefully, especially if you are not a subscriber to Veritas. And if you have the last issue of Veritas, listen carefully anyway, because I will interject at times into this broadcast some things that we discovered in our research that were not printed in the article. Our research period covered over 2 years, ladies and gentlemen, and the results of that research is indisputable. According to the Constitution for the United States of America, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 1, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. The Constitution specifically prohibits a direct tax upon the people and enumerates exactly how a tax must be laid, if, of course, one is. It must be levied against the states, and it is the responsibility of the states to figure out where to get their money. Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 4 states, no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration hereinbefore directed to be taken. Also, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution grants certain powers to the federal government and prohibits the federal government from exercising certain other powers or infringing upon the rights of the citizens of the several states. It also states specifically that any powers not specifically prohibited to nor granted to the federal government were to be left to the people or to the states. Now, if you've all got a copy of the Constitution, I suggest you look all of those things up and make sure that you understand them. The Constitution states that the federal government's power lies mainly within the states in the power granted to the federal government concerning interstate commerce. Outside of that, ladies and gentlemen, there isn't much power that the federal government has, ever has had, or ever can have within the several states that is granted by the Constitution for the United States of America. Our investigation of the alleged Internal Revenue Service and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has disclosed a broad premeditated conspiracy to defraud the citizens of the United States of America. Examination of the United States Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, the statutes at large, congressional record, the Federal Register, and Internal Revenue manuals too numerous to list reveals a crime of such magnitude that words cannot adequately describe the betrayal of the American people. What we uncovered, ladies and gentlemen, has clearly been designed to circumvent the limits of the Constitution for the United States of America and implement the Communist Manifesto within the 50 states. Marx and Engels claimed that in the effort to create a classless society, a graduated income tax could be used as a weapon to destroy the middle class, what they called the bourgeoisie. Magic is the art of illusion, deception, if you will. Those who practice magic are called the Magi, always have been. They have created a web of obfuscation and confusion in the law. When the courts have ruled them unconstitutional or unlawful, they have merely stepped outside jurisdiction and venue. You see, by fooling the people, they continued the crime. These magicians have convinced Americans that we have a status we do not. We are led to believe we must do things that are not required. Through the clever use of language, the government promotes the fraud. The Bureau of Internal Revenue and the alleged Internal Revenue Service were not created by Congress. Regardless of what you have ever been told, they were not created by Congress. These are not organizations or agencies of the Department of the Treasury or even of the federal government. I know this will come as a shock to most of you, and when you learn the whole truth of it, you will be enraged, for you have been robbed all your life. You have been paying tribute to a conqueror who has conquered you simply by practicing magic. These agencies appear to be operated through pure trusts administered by the Secretary of the Treasury, the trustee, the settler of the trusts, and the beneficiary or beneficiaries are unknown. According to the law governing trusts, the information does not ever have to be revealed. The organization of the Department of the Treasury can be found in 31 United States Code. That's Title 31, ladies and gentlemen, United States Code, Chapter 3, beginning on page 7. You will not find anywhere listed in Title 31 United States Code or in Title 31 United States Code Chapter 3, beginning on page 7, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the Internal Revenue Service, the Secret Service, or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They are not listed. Yet, according to law, all of the agencies, departments, and bureaus of the Department of the Treasury must be listed in Title 31. Section 3. We learned that the Bureau of Internal Revenue with small first letters, Internal Revenue Service, all capital letters, the Bureau of Internal Revenue Service, Internal Revenue Service, all small letters, Official Internal Revenue Service, the Federal Alcohol Administration, the Director of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms are all one and the same organization, and we found this to be intentionally obfuscated, both in the law and in every instance of any statement ever given to the public. Our investigation discovered that except for the very few who are engaged in specific activities, the citizens of the 50 states of the United States of America have never been required to file or to pay income taxes. The federal government is engaged in constructive fraud on a massive scale. Americans who have been frightened into filing and paying income taxes have been robbed of their money. Millions of lives have been ruined. Hundreds of thousands of innocent people have been imprisoned on the pretense they violated laws that do not exist over all of the years that this scam has been perpetrated. Some have been driven to suicide. Marriages have been destroyed. Property has been confiscated to pay taxes that were never owed. Without trial, without even having a lien filed. You see, when they tell you that there's a lien against your property, they're lying to you. They file a notice of lien. They have no court order, no judgment, no lien has ever been fired by the Internal Revenue Service in its history. Everyone is afraid of them, so they buckle under, and lives are destroyed. It all started, ladies and gentlemen, during the Civil War when Abraham Lincoln imposed a war tax upon the citizens. The war tax lawfully applied only to those citizens who resided within the Federal District of Columbia and the federally owned territories, dockyards, naval bases, or forts, and those who were considered to be in rebellion against the Union. Many citizens of the several states, thinking that they had to pay, in fact volunteered and did pay. After the war, the tax was repealed. This left the impression with the people that the President and Congress could levy an unapportioned direct tax upon the citizens of the several states, when in fact no such tax had ever been imposed. The tax was not fraud, as nothing was done to deceive the people. Those who were deceived, in fact, deceived themselves. In the last century, the United States acquired by conquest the territory of the Philippine Islands, Guam, and Puerto Rico. The Philippine Customs Administrative Act was passed by the Philippine Commission during the period from September 1st, 1900 to August 31st, 1902, to regulate trade with foreign countries and to create revenue in the form of duties, imposts, and excises. This act created the federal government's first trust fund, called Trust Fund Number 1, the Philippine Special Fund, Customs Duties, Title 31, United States Code, Section 1321. The act was administered under the general supervision and control of the Secretary of Finance and Justice. The Philippine Commission, ladies and gentlemen, passed another act known as the Internal Revenue Law of 1904. This act created the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the federal government's second trust fund, called Trust Fund Number 2, the Philippine Special Fund, Internal Revenue, spelled in small letters, lowercase. 31 United States Code, Section 1321. In the Act, Article 1, Section 2, we find, quote, "There shall be established a Bureau of Internal Revenue, the chief officer of which bureau shall be known as the Collector of Internal Revenue. He shall be appointed by the civil governor with the advice and consent of the Philippine Commission, and shall receive a salary at the rate of 8,000 pesos per annum. The Bureau of Internal Revenue shall belong to the Department of Finance and Justice. End quote. And in Section 3 we find, quote, the Collector of Internal Revenue, under the direction of the Secretary of Finance and Justice, shall have general superintendence of the assessment and collection of all taxes and excises imposed by this Act or by any act amendatory thereof, and shall perform such other duties as may be required by law. It is clear, ladies and gentlemen, that the Customs Administrative Act was to fall within the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which bureau was to be responsible for all taxes and excises imposed by the Act, which clearly included import and export excise taxes. This effectively merged Customs and Internal Revenue in the Philippines. When Prohibition was ratified in 1919 with the 18th Amendment, the government created federal bureaucracies to enforce the outlaw of alcohol. As protest and resistance to Prohibition increased, so did new federal laws and the number of bureaucrats hired to enforce them. And after much bloodshed and public anger, Prohibition was repealed with the 21st Amendment, which was ratified in 1933, a key date which we have discussed many times on this broadcast. It is the actual year that the United States, for all intents and purposes, died and became an oligarchy. In 1933, President Roosevelt declared a banking emergency. The Congress gave the President literal dictatorial powers under the War Powers Act of 1917. Congress used the economic emergency as the excuse to give blanket approval to any and all presidential executive orders, past, present, or future. Roosevelt, with a little help from his socialist friends, was prolific in his production of new legislation and executive orders. In 1935, the Public Administration Clearinghouse wrote and Roosevelt introduced the Federal Alcohol Act. Almost every piece of legislation introduced in Congress and in the several states since that date have come from the Public Administration Clearinghouse, which literally is under the thumb of the International Monetary Fund, which today is administered by the United Nations. So now we have the Federal Alcohol Act. Congress passed it into law. The Act established the Federal Alcohol Administration. But that same year, the Supreme Court, in a monumental ruling, struck down the Act, among many others, on a long list of draconian and New Deal laws, all of them unconstitutional. The Federal Alcohol Administration, however, did not go away. It became involved in other affairs and was placed, literally, in a sort of standby status, waiting to be used. And at some unknown date, prior to 1940, another Bureau of Internal Revenue was established in Puerto Rico. It became the 62nd Trust Fund that was created and named Trust Fund Number 62, Puerto Rico Special Fund, Internal Revenue, uppercase I and uppercase R. Note, ladies and gentlemen, that the Puerto Rico Special Fund has Internal Revenue, capital I and R. The Philippines Special Fund, Internal Revenue, is in lowercase letters. Now, between 1904 and 1938, the China Trade Act was passed to deal with opium, cocaine, and citric wines shipped out of China. And it appears to have been administered in the Philippines by the Bureau of Internal Revenue. We studied a copy of the Code of Federal Regulations of the United States of America in force June 1st, 1938, Title 26, Internal Revenue, Chapter 1, Parts 1 through 137. On page 65, it makes reference to the China Trade Act, where we find the first use of such terms as income, credits, withholding, assessment and collection of deficiencies, extension of time for payment, and failure to file return. The entire substance of Title 26 deals with foreign individuals, foreign corporations, foreign insurance corporations, foreign ships, income from sources within the possessions of the United States, not states. Citizens of the United States and domestic corporations deriving income from sources within a possession of the United States and the China Trade Act corporations. A domestic corporation, according to federal law, is a corporation residing within the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, at that time the Philippines, the Northern Marianas Trust Territory, and other territories belonging to the United States government, not states. All of the taxes covered by these laws concerned the imposts, excise taxes, and duties to be collected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue for such items as narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. The only Internal Revenue Service, the only Bureau of Internal Revenue in existence at that time was the Bureau of Internal Revenue in the Philippines and in Puerto Rico. The alleged Internal Revenue Service likes to make a big do, ladies and gentlemen, about the fact that Al Capone was jailed for tax evasion. The Internal Revenue Service will not tell you the truth that the tax Capone evaded was not income tax as we know it or as you think of it, but the tax due on the income from the alcohol which he had illegally imported from Canada. He did not pay the duties, imposts, and excise taxes on this alcohol. His partner was a man named Bronfman, who now owns Seagram, who made a deal with the United States government, paid a couple of $1 million, and got off scot-free. If Al Capone had paid the tax, he would not have been convicted. He would not have gone to prison. The Internal Revenue Act of 1939 was clearly concerned with all taxes, imposts, excises, and duties collected on trade between the possessions and territories of the United States and foreign individuals, foreign corporations, or foreign governments. The income tax laws have always applied only to the Philippines, Puerto Rico, District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, territories, and insular possessions. Under the Reorganization Plan No. 3 of 1940, which appears at 5 United States Code Service, Section 903, the Federal Alcohol Administration and offices of members and administrator thereof were abolished, and their functions directed to be administered under direction and supervision of Secretary of Treasury through Bureau of Internal Revenue. Notice it says it was not assigned to the Treasury Department. You see, most sheeple would read this and believe that this was just a transfer. But it is not true. Under the Reorganization Plan No. 3 of 1940, which appears at 5 United States Code Service, Section 903, the Federal Alcohol Administration and offices of members and administrator thereof were abolished, and their functions directed to be administered under direction and supervision of Secretary of Treasury through Bureau of Internal Revenue. Remember, there were only 2 bureaus of Internal Revenue. We found this history in all of the older editions of 27 United States Code Service, Section 201. It has been removed from current editions. This is why we encourage the listening audience to find the oldest books that they can find when researching the law or the history of this country. Only 2 bureaus of Internal Revenue have ever existed, one in the Philippines and another in Puerto Rico. Events that have transpired tell us that the Federal Alcohol Administration was absorbed by the Puerto Rico Trust Fund No. 62, Internal Revenue. World War II, ladies and gentlemen, for those who already, for many years, had been applying their plan to destroy this nation, was a golden opportunity. Americans were willing to sacrifice almost anything if they thought that sacrifice would win the war. They would never question the government, for it was unpatriotic, and to be unpatriotic during a world war was something that no one wanted to be. In that atmosphere, Congress passed the Victory Tax Act. It mandated an income tax for the years 1943 and 1944 to be filed and paid in the years 1944 and 1945. The Victory Tax Act automatically expired at the end of 1944. The federal government, with the clever use of language, created the myth that the tax was applicable to all Americans. Because of their desire to win the war, Americans filed and paid the tax. Because of ignorance of the law, Americans filed and paid the tax. The government promoted this fraud and even threatened those who objected. Americans forgot that the law expired in 2 years. It's in the books, folks. Anyone can find it. When the date had come and gone, they continued to keep records, they continued to file, and they continued to pay the tax. Bah! The federal government continued to print returns and collect the tax, knowing full well that the law had expired. Never mind the fact that no citizen of any of the several states of the Union was ever liable to pay the tax in the first place. The fiction that because it was an excise tax, it was legal, is not true, ladies and gentlemen. The power of the federal government is limited to its own property as stated in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 17, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes as stated in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 3. 18 United States Code, Section 921, definitions states, quote, the term interstate or foreign commerce includes commerce between any place in a state and any place outside of that state or within any possession of the United States, not including the Canal Zone or the District of Columbia, but such term does not include commerce between places within the same state, but through any place outside of that state. The term state includes the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and the possessions of the United States, not including the Canal Zone, end quote. Only employees of the federal government, residents of the District of Columbia, residents of naval bases, residents of forts, United States citizens of the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, territories, and insular possessions were lawfully required to file and pay the victory tax. Ladies and gentlemen, Veritas is the only national newspaper that is hand-delivered by special messenger to everybody in Washington, D.C. Every senator, every representative, every agency and department head, every member of the cabinet, the president, and the vice president, at my expense. In only 5 issues, we have reached a subscription base of over 6,000 subscribers. It is important, ladies and gentlemen, that if you are not receiving Veritas, that you subscribe now. The next issue is a killer. It's going to outline the deception that they are using to place United States military forces under command of foreign officers under the flag of the United Nations. It is unconstitutional, illegal, and unlawful. It is, in fact, treason. If you would like to subscribe, send $27 for 24 issues to Veritas. Make your check or money order payable to Veritas. Spelled V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. Veritas is Latin for truth, and it is the only newspaper in the United States of America today where you're likely to find any truth at all. Send your check or money order for $27 for 24 issues to Post Office Box 3390. That's P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. Again, that's $27 for 24 issues. Make your check or money order payable to Veritas. V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. And send it to Veritas at P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. And I will repeat that address again at the end of this broadcast. And folks, while you're at it, call Swiss America Trading. Thank them for sponsoring the Hour of the Time. Tell them that you're a steady listener to William Cooper and the Hour of the Time, and you'll receive red carpet VIP treatment. Get your hands on some real money, and do it now. Because tomorrow night, you're going to hear that it is, in fact, already decided and already being implemented. We are going to a cashless society, and we have it straight from the horse's mouth. The number to call to get your hands on some real money and not get caught with your pants down is 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. And also, ladies and gentlemen, the intelligence service of the Second Continental Army of the Republic is looking for a few good men and women. I sped it up there so that we could get on with this. In 1953, the United States relinquished its control over the Philippines. Why do the Philippine Pure Trusts, number one, Customs and Duties, and number two, Internal Revenue, continued to be administered today? In 1953, we relinquished all control over the Philippines, yet the trusts are still in existence. They are still being administered. Customs and Duties and Internal Revenue are still in existence, yet we are not in the Philippines. Who are the settlers of these trusts? What is done with the funds in these trusts? What businesses, if any, do these trusts operate? Who are the beneficiaries? Now, you should all know by now that every agency of the United States government has franking privileges. If you get a letter from any legitimate agency of the United States government, it doesn't require a stamp or to be stamped. Yet every time you get a letter from the Internal Revenue Service, it is stamped and postage has been paid. That is because, ladies and gentlemen, it is not an agency or a branch of any portion of the federal government or the government of any of the several states. Who are the beneficiaries of these trusts? Coincidentally, on July 9th, 1953, the Secretary of the Treasury, G.M. Humphrey, citing, and I quote, "by virtue of the authority vested in me," end quote. Let me say that again. Citing, "by virtue of the authority vested in me," changed the name of the Bureau of the Internal Revenue, BIR, to Internal Revenue Service when he signed what is now Treasury Order 150-06. This was an obvious attempt to legitimize the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Without the approval of Congress or the President, Humphrey, without any legal authority, tried to turn a pure trust into an agency of the Department of the Treasury. Yet, in the United States Code, it is still to this day not listed as an agency of the Department of the Treasury. But people bought it. His actions were illegal, but went unchallenged. Did he change the name of the BIR in Puerto Rico or the BIR in the Philippines? In 1954, the United States picked up Guam under the Mutual Security Act. The Act and other documents make reference to the definition of Guam and the United States as being mutually interchangeable. In the same year, the Internal Revenue Code of 1954 was passed. The code provides for the United States and Guam to coordinate the individual income tax. Pertinent information on the tax issue may be found in 26 Code of Federal Regulations 301.7654-1, called Coordination of United States and Guam Individual Income Taxes, 26 CFR 7654-1 small e, Military Personnel in Guam, 48 United States Code, Section 1421 small I, Income Tax Laws Defined. The Constitution forbids unapportioned direct taxes upon the citizens of the several states of the 50 states of the Union. Therefore, the federal government must trick or defraud people into volunteering to pay taxes as, quote, U.S. citizens of either Guam, the Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico. It sounds absolutely insane, and it is, ladies and gentlemen, but it is absolutely true. Don't you feel great? P.T. Barnum said there's a sucker born every minute, and in the United States, he was wrong. There's about 18 suckers born every half a second. On June 6, 1972, Acting Secretary of the Treasury Charles E. Walker signed Treasury Order number 120-01, which established the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Now, he did this with the stroke of his pen, citing again, by virtue of the authority vested in me as Secretary of the Treasury, without any legislation passed from Congress, without any executive order or approval of the President or the American people, or any knowledge of any of those people that he was even doing this. By virtue of the authority vested in me as Secretary of the Treasury, including the authority in Reorganization Plan number 26 of 1950. He ordered the transfer, as specified herein, the functions, powers, and duties of the Internal Revenue Service arising under laws relating to alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, including the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the Internal Revenue Service, to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, hereinafter referred to as the Bureau, which is hereby established. The Bureau shall be headed by the Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, hereinafter referred to as the Director. The Director shall perform his duties under the general direction of the Secretary of the Treasury, hereinafter referred to as the Secretary, and under the supervision of the Assistant Secretary, Enforcement, Tariff, and Trade Affairs and Operations, hereinafter referred to as the Assistant Secretary. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that in Puerto Rico there is a Secretary of the Treasury? Did you know that in the Philippines, during the days that we had possession of the Philippines, there was a Secretary of the Treasury? Treasury Order 120-01 assigned to the new Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Chapters 51, 52, and 53 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1954, and Sections 7652 and 7653 of such code. Chapters 61 through 80, inclusive of the Internal Revenue Code of 1954. The Federal Alcohol Administration Act, 27 U.S.C. Chapter 8, which in 1935 the Supreme Court had declared unconstitutional within the several states of the Union. 18 United States Code, Chapter 44, Title 7, Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, 18 United States Code, Appendix, Sections 1201 to 1203, 18 United States Code, 1262 to 1265, 1952, and 3615, and etc. Mr. Walker then makes a statement within Treasury Order 120-01 that is very revealing. And he says this, quote, "The terms Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division and Commissioner of Internal Revenue, wherever used in regulations, rules, and instructions and forms issued or adopted for the administration and enforcement of the laws specified in paragraph 2 hereof, which are in effect are in use on the effective date of this order shall be held to mean the director. Who is the director? Well, he's already specified it in this order. He says the director is the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. You see, Walker seemed to branch the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, creating the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, BATF, and then, with that last statement, joined them back together into one. Incredible, isn't it? In the Federal Register, Volume 41, number 180 of Wednesday, September 15th, 1976, we find this, quote, "The term Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division has been replaced by the term Internal Revenue Service." End quote. We found this pattern of deception and obfuscation everywhere we looked during our investigation. For further evidence of the fact that the Internal Revenue Service and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms are one and the same organization, check 27 USCA Section 201. This is how the Magi perform magic. Secretary Humphrey, with no authority, creates an agency of the Department of the Treasury called Internal Revenue Service, out of the air, from an offshore pure trust called Bureau of Internal Revenue. The settler and beneficiaries of the trust are unknown. The trustee is the Secretary of the Treasury. Acting Secretary Walker further launders the trust by creating from the alleged Internal Revenue Service the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Unlike Humphrey, however, Walker assuaged himself of any guilt when he nullified the order by proclaiming, and I quote, "The terms Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division and Commissioner of Internal Revenue, wherever used in regulations, rules, and instructions and forms issued or adopted for the administration and enforcement of the laws specified in paragraph 2 hereof, which are in effect or in use on the effective date of this order, shall be held to mean the Director." In the order, the director as defined as the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Walker created the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of Humphrey's Internal Revenue Service. He then says that what was transferred is the same entity as the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. He knew he could not legally create something from nothing without the authority of Congress and or the President, so he made it look like he did something that he had, in fact, not done. To compound the fraud, the Federal Register published the unbelievable assertion that a person had been replaced with a thing. The term Director of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division has been replaced with the term Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service, in all actuality, under this Treasury order, is one single person, the Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division. The Federal Alcohol Administration, which administered the Federal Alcohol Act, and offices of members and administrator thereof were abolished, and their functions were directed to be administered under direction and supervision of the Secretary of Treasury through Bureau of Internal Revenue, now Internal Revenue Service. The Federal Alcohol Act was ruled unconstitutional within the 50 states, so was transferred to the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which is an offshore trust, which became the Internal Revenue Service, which gave birth to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and somehow the term Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, which is a person within the BATF, spawned the alleged Internal Revenue Service via another flick of the pen on September 15, 1976. In a brilliant flash of logic, our research team, a portion of which was headed by Wayne C. Benson, determined that he could check these facts by filing a Freedom of Information Act request asking the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to name the person who now administers the Federal Alcohol Act. If we were wrong, a reply stating that no record exists as to any name of any person who administers the act would be returned. The request was submitted to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The reply came back on July the 14th, 1994, from the Secret Service, an unexpected source, which discloses a connection we had not suspected. The reply states that John McGaugh of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms of the Department of the Treasury administers the Federal Alcohol Act, an act which was declared unconstitutional in 1935 by the United States Supreme Court. You may remember from the Waco hearings that John McGaugh is the Director, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Every single bit of our research was confirmed by that one admission. Now, despite, ladies and gentlemen, all the pin flicking and the smoke and mirrors, there is no such organization of the Department of the Treasury known as Internal Revenue Service or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Title 31, United States Code, is money and finance, and therein are published the laws pertaining to the Department of the Treasury, DOT. Title 31, United States Code, Chapter 3, is a statutory list of the organizations of the Department of the Treasury. Internal Revenue Service and our Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms are not listed anywhere within Title 31 United States Code as agencies or organizations of the Department of the Treasury. They are referenced, however, as, quote, to be audited, end quote, by the Comptroller General in Title 31 United States Code, Section 713. And indeed, if they are the pure trusts that we know them to be, this is exactly how they should be referenced. Now, we've already demonstrated that both of these organizations are in reality the same organization. Where we find one, we will surely find the other. In 27, Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 1, Section 250.11, definitions, we find, quote, and listen to this, it is the only definition extant at all for this term, quote, United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Office, dash, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Office in Puerto Rico. And we also find this, Secretary, the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico. And we also find this, Revenue Agent, any duly authorized Commonwealth Internal Revenue Agent of the Department of the Treasury of Puerto Rico. Remember that Internal Revenue is the name of the Puerto Rico Trust number 62. For all of these terms that I have just disclosed to you, begin with uppercase letters. It is perfectly logical and reasonable that a revenue agent works as an employee for the Department of the Treasury of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, since there is no such thing in the federal government anywhere within the law. Prove me wrong. Where is the alleged Internal Revenue Service? The Internal Revenue Code of 1939, also known as the Internal Revenue Code of 1954, etc., 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 27 Code of Federal Regulations, refers to Title 26 as relevant to Title 27, as per 27 Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 1, Section 250.30, which states that 26 United States Code 5001, small a, 1, is governing a 27 United States Code law. In fact, 26 United States Code, chapters 51, 52, and 53 are the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms taxes administered by the Internal Revenue Service, alias Bureau of Internal Revenue, alias Virgin Islands Bureau of Internal Revenue, alias Director Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, alias Internal Revenue Service. According to 26 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1.6001-1, small d, records Listen to this carefully. No one is required to keep records or file returns unless specifically notified by the district director by notice served upon him in writing to make such returns, render such statements, or keep such specific records as will enable the district director to determine whether or not such person is liable for tax under Subtitle A of the Code. 26 Code of Federal Regulations states that this rule includes state individual income taxes. Now don't get yourself all lathered up, because state means, and I quote, the District of Columbia, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Marianas Islands, Puerto Rico, territories, and insular possessions, end quote. 44 United States Code says that every regulation or rule must be published in the Federal Register. It also states that every regulation or rule must be approved by the Secretary of the Treasury. If there is no regulation, there is no implementation of the law. If there is no regulation, there is no implementation of the law. There is no regulation governing, quote, failure to file a return, end quote. If you don't believe me, you look for yourself. There is no computer code for failure to file. The only thing we could find was a requirement stating where to file an income tax return. This can be found in 26 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1.6091-3, which states that, and I quote, income tax returns are required to be filed with the Director of International Operations, end quote. Now just who in the hell is the Director of International Operations? No one, ladies and gentlemen, in government is allowed to do anything unless they have been given specific written authority in the law, or someone who has been given authority in the law gives that person a delegation of authority order, spelling out exactly what they can and cannot do under that specific order. We combed the Department of the Treasury's handbook of delegation orders, and we found that no one in the Internal Revenue Service or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has any authority whatsoever to do most of the things that they have been doing for years. I will continue this tomorrow night. In the meantime, send your $27, ladies and gentlemen, with your check made out to Veritas, V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. To Veritas, Post Office Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's Veritas, Post Office Box 3390. St. John's, Arizona, 85936. For $27, you can get 24 issues of the only newspaper in the United States of America that doesn't feed you full of pablum and bury you in a pile of bullshit. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless you all. I'm William Cooper, and you're listening to the Hour of the Time. And for all of you calling and asking, no, we have not discontinued our series on the mysteries, the one pursuing the clash between Freemasonry and Catholicism. It's just, folks, that we have to take care of some other things, and that's what last night and tonight is all about. We have a newspaper. The newspaper is called Veritas. V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. It is, without any doubt, the best, most truthful newspaper in America. It's the only newspaper that dares to discuss in-depth and researched in-depth, citing sources, what nobody else will touch with a 10-foot pole. And when they do, or if they do, I should say, which is very rare, they merely brush the surface. It is not a newsletter. It's not your typical Patriot mimeographed 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. It is a full-sized newspaper. It is not a tabloid like the Spotlight, ladies and gentlemen. And we tell the truth in Veritas. When facts are facts, we write them as articles. We do not slant our articles. We merely tell the truth. When we are writing editorials, we clearly label them as editorials. And when we have something that is the writer's opinion, we clearly label it opinion. You don't find that anywhere else. Some of the things that we have touched upon have shaken the city of Washington. You see, our newspaper is hand-delivered by special messenger to every member of the House of Representatives, every senator, every department head, every agency head, every member of the President's cabinet, the President and the Vice President with every issue at my expense. Nobody else does that either. You see, I put my money where my mouth is, ladies and gentlemen, which is more than I can say for many of you. Unfortunately, most people who call themselves conservatives and patriots don't even support their own causes. That's shameful. Just one issue of any of the 6 that we have already published, take your pick, any one of those issues are priceless. Literally priceless. If you were to collect the information, do the research yourself, it would cost you years and thousands of dollars. You don't find what we publish anywhere else. I don't care what you subscribe to, and I don't care how well you like it. As you heard last night in part 1 of this 2-night series, on just our headline article that appeared in the last issue of Veritas, if you had been able to research this information, it would have taken you probably most of your lifetime. It probably would have cost you tens of thousands of dollars if you had done it on your own. And ladies and gentlemen, it would have been worth it because it would have saved you all the tribute that you have been paying over the years and will continue to pay for the rest of your life because you didn't take the time to research it and because you are afraid to stand up for what is right, and that is the truth. You see, years ago I put together the world's largest and most successful civilian intelligence gathering organization in the entire world. We have people working tirelessly every day, digging for information, doing assigned research projects, gathering intelligence at every level of government, military, and civilian life, not only in this country, but worldwide. And the results of these efforts are what you read in Veritas and what you hear on the hour of the time. Much of it you will never hear and you will never see. It is filtered through a vast network across this country into the hands of the leaders of the militia, who will use that information to make sure that we are successful in this war. And make no mistake about it, we are at war. A war between those who want to put together a one-world totalitarian socialist government upon the bones and the ashes of the Constitution for the United States of America and the liberty of the American people. They want to eliminate all Christians, all fundamentalist religions, no matter what they call themselves, the Islamic religion, and Orthodox Judaism. Real Americans would not allow any of this to happen, for real Americans love and understand liberty. Those are faced off with real Americans who will fight to the death to preserve liberty, freedom, and justice. That's what we're all about. All people, no matter what their race, religion, color, or creed, are welcome if they are real Americans and understand the concept of liberty, which simply is this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm free to do anything, and you're free to do anything that is not prohibited to us by our constitutions of our states and of the Constitution for the United States of America, and is not against the laws that were made according to those constitutions and are legal and lawful and constitutional laws, as long as we do not injure the person or property of any other human being upon this earth, no matter their race, religion, color, or creed. For those of you who think that it's the Jews, you're wrong. For Jewish Orthodox synagogues and the Jewish Orthodox religion will be destroyed if our enemies win this battle. If you believe that it's the blacks, you're wrong. The blacks stand to lose more than anyone in this battle. They think they're going to be liberated. They think they're going to finally be set free. But the elite of the world who are bringing into reality the New World Order refer to them as the useless eaters, along with most of the Hispanic and Indian races. And I mean Indian as in American Indian. So if you would like to get a newspaper that finally will tell you the truth, finally, subscribe to Veritas. And by the way, the price is going to have to go back up. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, so you better subscribe now. It was $55 for 24 issues. We managed to bring it down to $27. We miscalculated. I think the final price for 24 issues is going to be somewhere between $30 and $35. And as soon as this next issue goes to press, which is Monday, the new price will take effect. Right now, you can still get Veritas, 24 issues for $27. And if you're interested in distributing our newspaper, make sure you get this next issue and refer to our ad on distributorships. You'll find that it's very attractive, and you can make a very decent profit distributing our newspaper. Veritas is Latin for truth. And that's what you're going to find in the pages of Veritas. Whenever we make a mistake, we will not only publish a retraction and correct our mistake, but as those of you who are already subscribing to Veritas have already found out, we will publish the retraction and the correction on the very front page of the newspaper. Not like the other establishment rags and lying communist media fronts in this country. Whenever they are forced to by a court, and that's the only time they ever do it, they bury it in the paper. They make it very, very small and usually put it somewhere where nobody will ever see it. Make your check or money order payable to Veritas. V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. Veritas. And send it to Veritas. Post Office Box 3390. St. John's, Arizona, 85936. I will repeat that address later in the broadcast. Veritas, Post Office Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. And shame on you if you ever listen to this broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, without pen and paper by your side. By the way, folks, you can order any of the broadcasts of the hour of the time on studio quality stereo broadcast tapes. For members, they're $8 per tape. And if you don't know if you're a member, you're not one, so don't bother in calling and asking. $8 per tape for members. $10 for non-members. $10 for non-members. If you want to be a member, write and ask how you can become a member of the intelligence service. You have to take an oath of allegiance, ladies and gentlemen, to the Constitution for the United States of America. If you're not willing to do that, don't bother writing. You'll never get in. Not if you had $100 million membership fee to offer, you would be refused. If you would like to order tapes of the hour of the time, specify the date or the catalog number in our catalog of the tape. The date or the catalog number. If you're listening, ladies and gentlemen, after midnight, it's the date before midnight is the proper date. Make check or money order payable to Annie, A-N-N-I-E, and send it to the Intelligence Service, That's not to be on the check. That's the address to send it to. The Intelligence Service, P.O. Box 1420, Sholo, spelled exactly like it sounds, Arizona 85901. That's the Intelligence Service, P.O. Box 1420, Sholo, Arizona 85901. Now I continue where we left off last night with the headline article that appeared in the last issue, issue number 6 of Veritas. No one in government is allowed to do anything unless they have been given specific written authority in the law, or someone who has been given authority in the law gives that person a delegation of authority order, spelling out exactly what they can and cannot do under that specific order. We combed the Department of the Treasury's Handbook of Delegation Orders, and we found that no one in the Internal Revenue Service or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has any authority to do most of the things they have been doing for years. For example, Delegation Order number 115, Revision 5 of May 12, 1986, is the only delegation of authority to conduct audit. It is the only delegation of authority to conduct audit. It clearly states that the Internal Revenue Service and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms can only audit themselves, and only for amounts of $750 or less. Any amount above that amount must be audited by the Comptroller General according to Title 31 United States Code. No other authority to audit exists. Now let me tell you how much our newspaper is shaking up Washington. Since our newspaper revealed this story and was hand-delivered to everyone in Washington, D.C., the IRS has discontinued their random audit of American citizens. So don't tell me that one person cannot make a difference. One person, many instances throughout the history of the world, has changed the entire future of the world. No other authority to audit exists. No Internal Revenue Service or Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agent or representative can furnish us with any law, rule, or regulation which gives them the authority to audit anyone other than themselves. Order number 191 states that they can levy on property, but only if that property is in the hands of third parties. The manual states on page 1100-40.2 of April 21st, 1989, Criminal Investigation Division, that the Criminal Investigation Division enforces the criminal statutes applicable to income, estate, gift, employment, and excise tax laws involving United States citizens residing in foreign countries and non-resident aliens subject to federal income tax filing requirements by developing information concerning alleged criminal violations thereof, evaluating allegations and indications of such violations to determine investigations to be undertaken, investigating suspected criminal violations of such laws, recommending prosecution when warranted, and measuring effectiveness of the investigation process. You feel kind of stupid now? I bet many of you have been calling those of us who have been researching this and have discovered what's been going on and stopped filing returns and paying this illegal tribute. I bet many of you have been calling us names over the years, haven't you? Hang your heads in shame. You are the sheep, not us. On page 1100-40.1, it states in 1132.7 of April 21st, 1989, Director Office of Taxpayer Service and Compliance, responsible for operation of a comprehensive enforcement and assistance program for all taxpayers under the immediate jurisdiction of the Assistant Commissioner International, directs the full range of collection activity on delinquent accounts and delinquent returns for taxpayers overseas, in Puerto Rico, and in United States possessions and territories. 1132.72 of April 21, 1989, Collection Division says, executes the full range of collection activities on delinquent accounts, which includes securing delinquent returns involving taxpayers outside the United States and those in United States territories, possessions, and in Puerto Rico. The United States Attorney's Manual, Title VI, Tax Division, Chapter 4, page 16, October 1st, 1988, 6-4.270, Criminal Division Responsibility states, and I quote, the Criminal Division has limited responsibility for the prosecution of offenses investigated by the Internal Revenue Service. Those offenses are excise violations involving liquor tax, narcotics, stamp tax, firearms, wagering, and coin-operated gambling and amusement machines, malfeasance offenses committed by Internal Revenue Service personnel, forcible rescue of seized property, corrupt or forcible interference with an officer or employee acting under the Internal Revenue laws, and unauthorized mutilation, removal, or misuse of stamps. Not postage stamps, revenue stamps. See 28 CFR, that's 28 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 0.70. We found this revelation, ladies and gentlemen, in Title 28, United States Code, Rule 54C, which is the Rules of Courts. The Rules of Courts, Title 28 U.S.C., ladies and gentlemen, was written by the Supreme Court Justices. So it doesn't need to go to the Supreme Court to decide upon whether it is constitutional. They ruled on it when they wrote it. Title 28, United States Code, Rule 54C. Application of terms. Quote, as used in these rules, the following terms have the designated meanings. Act of Congress includes any act of Congress locally applicable to and in force in the District of Columbia, in Puerto Rico, in a territory, or in an insular possession, end quote. 28 United States Code is the rules of courts and was written and approved by the justices of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in writing 28 United States Code, has already ruled upon this issue. It is the law. Feel kind of sheepish, do you? You should. Where does the money go that is paid into the Internal Revenue Service? Well, we know that it spends at least a year in what is called a Quad Zero account under an individual master file, after which time the director of the Internal Revenue Center can apparently do whatever he wants with the money. We know that it is sometimes dispersed under Treasury Order 91, Revision 1, May 12, 1986, which is a service agreement between the Internal Revenue Service and the Agency for International Development, or AID. When William Casey, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency during Iran-Contra, was the head of the Agency for International Development, he funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to the Soviet Union, which money was spent building the Kama River Truck Factory, the largest military production facility for tanks, trucks, armored personnel carriers, and other wheeled military vehicles in the entire world. The Kama River Factory has a production capability larger than all of the combined automobile and truck manufacturing plants in the entire United States of America. It was paid for with your income tax dollars. The agreement states, quote, authority is hereby delegated to the Assistant Commissioner International to develop and enter into the service agreement between the Treasury Department and the Agency for International Development. The Secretary of the Treasury is always appointed United States Governor of the International Monetary Fund in accordance with the international agreement that created the International Monetary Fund. The Secretary of the Treasury is paid by the International Monetary Fund, an agency of the United Nations, while serving as governor. Lloyd Bentsen held the following positions at the same time he was the Secretary of the Treasury: U.S. Governor of the International Monetary Fund, U.S. Governor of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, U.S. Governor of the Inter-American Development Bank, U.S. Governor of the African Development Bank, U.S. Governor of the Asian Development Bank, U.S. Governor of the African Development Fund, and U.S. Governor of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Mr. Bentsen received a salary from each of these organizations, which literally made him an unregistered agent of several foreign powers and the greatest welfare benefactor in the world. By birth, ladies and gentlemen, we are each a citizen of the state of California, are a citizen of the state of Arizona, are a citizen of whatever state wherein we individually were born. And at the same time, we are all, each of us, citizens of the United States of America, united with a small lowercase u, and are not subject to acts of Congress, other than the 18 powers specifically cited in the Constitution for the United States of America. People who are born are who reside within the Federal District of Columbia, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Northern Mariana Islands, any territory on any naval base or dockyard, within forts or within insular possessions, are called U.S. citizens, U and S both capitalized, and are subject to acts of Congress. In U.S. citizens, the C of citizens is lowercase, small letter. For those of us born as citizens of states, citizen is always capitalized, and the U of United States of America is always lowercase. Within the law, words have meanings that are not ever the same meanings that are accepted in common usage. Our Constitution is the Constitution for the United States of America, small u on the word united. The U.S. Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, sorry to tell you this, is the Constitution of Puerto Rico. We are subject to the laws of the jurisdiction which we volunteer to accept. In the law governing income tax, income is defined as foreign earned income, offshore oil well or windfall profits, and war profits. A return is prepared by a taxpayer to submit to the federal government taxes that he or she has collected. A taxpayer is one who collects taxes and submits the taxes as a return to the federal government. An employee is one who is employed by the federal government. An employer is the federal government. An individual is a citizen of Guam or the U.S. Virgin Islands. A business is defined as a government, a bank, or an insurance company. A resident is an alien citizen of Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico who resides within one of the 50 states of the United States of America or one of the other island possessions. And this will really grab you. A Form 1040, according to the law, is the income tax return for a non-resident alien citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands residing within one of the 50 states of the several states of the United States of America. If you volunteer that you are a U.S. citizen by checking it off on any form are saying it verbally, you have become a U.S. citizen by volunteering. If you write or print your name on a line labeled taxpayer, you have become a taxpayer. Since these forms are affidavits which you submit under penalty of perjury, you commit a crime every time you fill one out and sign stating that you are what you are not. The federal government is delighted by your ignorance and by your crime and will gladly accept your returns and your money. As proof, refer to the Virgin Islands Tax Guide, which states clearly, quote, all references to the district director or to the commissioner of Internal Revenue should be interpreted to mean the director of the Virgin Islands Bureau of Internal Revenue. All references to the Internal Revenue Service, the Federal Depository, and similar references should be interpreted as the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and so forth. Any questions in interpreting federal forms for use in the Virgin Islands should be referred to the Bureau of Internal Revenue. End quote. In Internal Revenue Service Publication 6209, computer codes for the IRS, quote, TC 150, end quote, is listed as the code for Virgin Island returns, and the codes 300 through 398 are listed as, quote, U.S. and United Kingdom tax treaty claims involving taxes on narcotics which were financed in the Cayman Islands and imported into the Virgin Islands, end quote. Whenever Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed for individual master file, or IMF, for people who are experiencing tax problems with the Internal Revenue Service, every single return involving a 1040 has been found to contain the above codes, except for some which are coded as Guam returns. Every return shows that the unsuspecting citizen is being taxed on income derived from importing narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, or firearms into the United States or one of its territories or possessions from a foreign country or from Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or into the Virgin Islands from the Cayman Islands. This elaborate scam manifests itself in many different ways. In order to maintain the semblance of legality, hats are changed from moment to moment. For instance, when you are told to submit records for examination, you are actually dealing with customs. When you submit an offer in compromise to the IRS, you are dealing with the Coast Guard. And when you are confronted by a special agent of the Internal Revenue Service, you are really dealing with a deputized United States Marshal. And when you are being investigated by the alleged Internal Revenue Service, you are really dealing with an agent contracted by the Justice Department to investigate narcotics violations. When the alleged Internal Revenue Service charges you with a crime, you are actually dealing with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which has the only section of the code which involves enforcement. You see, only a small part of Title 26 United States Code is administered by the alleged Internal Revenue Service. Most of the code, in fact, is administered by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, including Chapters 61 through 80, which is enforcement. In addition, Title 27, Code of Federal Regulations, is Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and states in Subpart B, Definitions, 250.11, Meaning of Terms, quote, United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Office equals Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Office in Puerto Rico. Every person we ever find who is being prosecuted by the alleged Internal Revenue Service has a code on their individual master file putting them in tax class 6, which clearly designated that they have violated a law relating to alcohol, tobacco, or firearms in Puerto Rico. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has no venue or jurisdiction within the borders of any of the 50 states of the United States of America, except in pursuit of an importer of contraband alcohol, tobacco, or firearms who failed to pay the tax on those items. As proof, ladies and gentlemen, please refer to the July 30th, 1993 ruling of the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit in 1 F. 3rd, 1511, 1993, United States Supreme Court, APP Lexus 19747, where the court ruled in United States versus D.J. Vollmer and Company that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has jurisdiction over the first sale of a firearm imported to the country, but they don't have jurisdiction over subsequent sales. All gun dealers who apply for and fill out a federal firearms license application and receive that license are licensed in Puerto Rico. Attorneys, including your defense attorney, the U.S. attorney, federal judges, and alleged Internal Revenue Service and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms personnel routinely lie in depositions and on the witness stand to perpetuate this fraud. They do this willingly and with full knowledge that they are committing perjury. Every single judge intentionally lies every time he or she gives instructions to a jury in a criminal or tax case brought by the Internal Revenue Service or Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They all know it and do it willingly and with full malice aforethought. Now, how does the government hire people who will intentionally work to defraud their fellow Americans? That was one question that just bothered me to the core. You see, most of those who work on the lower levels for the IRS and BATF and other agencies simply do not know the truth. They are only told what they're supposed to do by their supervisors, and thinking that their supervisors would not lie to them, they go out and do what they are told. They don't ask questions because their stupid little stinking job is more important than the liberty of the entire country. They do as they are told to earn a living until they can retire and collect a big fat government retirement check. Executives, U.S. attorneys, federal judges, and others do know and are with full knowledge and malice aforethought participating in the crime of the century. Many of these people, including the president, are paid lots of money. Oh, now you think I've gone off the deep end, huh? Well, just keep your ear glued to your little radio speaker, because I'm going to clean out your ears, and I hope clean up your life. And maybe together we can save freedom for not only this country but the world. You see, if we fall, the world falls. The Internal Revenue Manual, Handbook of Delegation Orders, January the 17th, 1983, page 1229-91, outlines the alleged Internal Revenue Service's system of monetary awards. Quote, of up to and including $5,000 for any one individual employee or group of employees in his or her immediate office, including field employees engaged in national office projects and contributions of employees of other government agencies and armed forces members, end quote, with the approval of the Deputy Commissioner. Quote, of $5,001 to $10,000 for any one individual or group, end quote, with the approval of the Deputy Commissioner. end quote, of $10,001 to $25,000 for any one individual or group with the Commissioner's concurrence. An additional, listen to this, quote, an additional monetary award of $10,000, total of $35,000 to the President of the United States through Treasury and OPM with the Commissioner's concurrence, end quote. These awards, ladies and gentlemen, include cash awards. They are not limited as to number that may be awarded to any one person or group. In fact, there is no time limitation placed upon any award. You see, any person or group of persons can be awarded this money, including U.S. attorneys, federal judges, your certified public accountant, the President of the United States, members of Congress, your mother, H&R Block, etc. In fact, the awards may be given to the same person or group each minute, each hour, every day, every week, every month, every year, or not at all. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. government and the alleged Internal Revenue Service, also known as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, have a perfectly legal system of bribery. The bribery works against the citizens of the several states of the United States of America. Our investigation, folks, uncovered an awful lot, and we only included a very little in this article. Now, successful use of any of this information requires an awful lot of study and an excellent understanding of the legal system and legal procedures. So I'm going to have to ask you, please do not compound any errors that you have already made by attempting to extract some imaginary magic bullet to use against the alleged Internal Revenue Service or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms from this broadcast, from last night's broadcast, or from the headline article in issue number 6 of Veritas. You see, it is not ever enough to discover this information. You must know it inside out, backward and forward, like you know the smell of your own breath. We have been betrayed, ladies and gentlemen, by those we trusted. We have been robbed of our money and our property. It happened simply because we trusted imperfect men to rule imperfect men, and we failed in our duty as the watchdog. If you really want to know what's wrong with this country, go in your bathroom right now and look into the mirror. It happened, ladies and gentlemen, because we have been ignorant, apathetic, and yes, even downright stupid. In my book, Behold a Pale Horse, I wrote this phrase: a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals that do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Ladies and gentlemen, the hour of the time is brought to you by Swiss America Trading. They deal only in non-reportable, non-confiscatable hard assets. Now, I told you that I was going to reveal to you tonight something that's coming, a cashless economy. I'm going to delay that until sometime next week, because I would like to devote an entire episode of the hour of the time to this problem, and it is a problem. Those of you who wish to begin preparing yourselves, who have not already begun, and believe me, pretty soon it's going to be too late, ladies and gentlemen, you had better start. You're going to need water. You're going to need food. You're going to need a Bible or the book of your religion to give you spiritual comfort in the month, the days, the years to come. You're going to need some bullets, and you're going to need some guns to protect yourself and defend your family and your community. You should join a militia and become active as an American, dedicated to the ideals and principles upon which this nation was founded. You need to study your country's history. There's a lot of things you need to know. You need warm clothing, and lots of it, to last you for a long time. And you need real money. You also need to be evaluating those around you. Get rid of the flakes, the leeches, and the hangers-on. Learn who are real people and who are not. I know a lot of you will have a tendency to slough this off right now, but I'm going to tell you that just as recently as 1988, I couldn't get anyone to listen to me. And now, thousands of people have written me, and they have said in those letters, Bill, I wished I had listened to you the first time I heard you, because everything that you have warned me about has come true. Call Swiss America Trading. Get your hands on some real money and do it now. 1-800-289-2646. Stop listening to the establishment news. Dan Rather doesn't have a brain. He has a teleprompter where he reads what he is told to read. And so do the rest of them. Peter Jennings is not even an American citizen. He is a Canadian citizen, which is already under the thumb of the New World Order. And I could go on and on and on. And they all belong to the Council on Foreign Relations and many other subversive organizations dedicated to bringing about a world totalitarian socialist government. So call 1-800-289-2646. Ladies and gentlemen, get your hands on some real money and do it now. 1-800-289-2646. Go back to your roots. You know, Linda Thompson's announced armed march on Washington provides a clean divide among the people who discuss it. Many people were either infuriated or horrified by the suggestion. You see, the armed march on Washington is often a major talking point in efforts to discredit Mrs. Thompson, ever since she announced the plan in April of 1994. Yet, U.S. government armed services regularly march through the streets and crowds of Washington, D.C. The participants in those marches wear the colors of the government, draw their pay from the government, and are ultimately trusted with lethal force within the Capitol. Why should the march of a citizen army be condemned? The armed march on Washington is a good talking point, and it cuts to the heart of the issue, right straight to the quick. The issue is the relationship of the people to their government. On this subject, people fall into one of three groups. The first group are the Royalists. Members of this group have no problem with military parades where the government's forces of mass destruction are paraded before the forcibly disarmed populace. On the subject of citizens' militias, the Royalist position is enunciated by M. Samuel Sherwood, founder and director and possibly the only member of the United States Militia Association. According to Mr. Sherwood, militias drilling with weapons would be totally inappropriate. We believe in county, city, and state militia units that have the charter, sanction, or approval of the sheriffs, county commissioners, or whoever the local political authority is based upon law. That's from the New American, February 6, 1995, page 29, and is a direct quote. Since the American Revolution of 1776 was illegal at the time, one may assume, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Sherwood would have backed the legal authority then in existence. That is, he would have supported the ruling sovereign, King George III, and his duly appointed governors and military commanders. According to King George, all rights and power came to the king directly from God, and in his royal generosity he licensed them out to his subjects to be enjoyed as long as they behaved themselves and did not displease King George. The second group, who have an opinion on the armed march on Washington, are the chicken hearts. They know we live in an occupied Roman province, and they are terrified of the Roman Imperial Guard. They gnaw their knuckles when the armed march on Washington is mentioned, and look around in fear of government eavesdroppers. The chicken hearts disapprove of the armed march on Washington because they believe, ladies and gentlemen, the paranoid U.S. government would order soldiers to open fire on the marchers. Despite their full understanding of the nature of our current government, they are religiously and viscerally incapable of opposing it. Waco, the staged torture, murder, and burning to death of innocents, was designed for the chicken hearts as an object lesson. In their fear, the chicken hearts will betray those who seek independence. They are the perfect complement to King George, Tiberius Caesar, Napoleon, or any other tyrant who seeks utter subjugation of the people. In discussions of the armed march on Washington, there is a third group. We shall call this third group the inheritors of the American Revolution. They remember the words of the Declaration of Independence, quote, that to secure life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government. These people believe that government is created and sustained by the citizens to serve their purposes and may be abolished when it no longer pleases the citizens. To these people, a government is no more holy than any other organization of human labor. When she canceled the armed march on Washington, Mrs. Thompson published a statement in which she said that her purpose for announcing the march in this first place was tactical. Has anything, she asked, in the history of this country since the Revolutionary War mobilized so many citizens so quickly, or so effectively, or done so much to literally scare the absolute bejeebers of a tyrannical government as the public announcement that enough is enough, we, the people, are going to arrest the traitors and man the weapons? She says that the announcement of the march resulted in a broad realization that the government is not able to suppress large numbers of people. The government lacks the manpower and the training. They have stretched their assets in too many places. They know they cannot rely on the U.S. military to fire on U.S. citizens, nor can the U.S. government rely on United Nations troops who don't train well together, don't speak the same language, don't use the same signals or equipment, and overall don't work together very well. They more resemble the Keystone Cops. It is only the U.S. government's propaganda machine that has some convinced the government is the great, all-powerful Oz. It was the march, she says, that forced people to ask the basic question, just how many troops could they call up anyway? The answer was that we outnumber the SOBs 100 to 1, easily. Do we have government by the will of the governed? Does a truly Republican government have anything to fear from the people? Anything to fear even from an armed group of citizens marching through the nation's capital? The armed march on Washington has been a marvelous talking point. Other subjects provide a wealth of perspectives, some genuine, some crafted by spin doctors. But this subject provokes reactions that lay bare the very premise of a citizen's relationship to its government. That was written by my friend Carol A. Valentine. Another woman with more guts than most men in this country today. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless each and every single one of you. And God save this republic.
All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, there's a loud knock on your door. Hey, honey, something's not right.
Throw out your arms. Clinton's gun law passed through. We're here from the government. We're here to help you.
And I'm from the IRS with the power to tax. If you've got a complaint, send us a fax.
Get out of this house. Surrender your guns. Give me your gold. You better obey if you want to grow old. Dance the goose step and do what you're told.
Hillary Shalala, Reno Janet Dyke, reading the words of General Albert Pike, demonic founder of the Ku Klux Klan.
$27, ladies and gentlemen, for 24 issues. Veritas. Make check or money order payable to Veritas and send to P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona 85936. That's P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona 85936.
Order out of chaos, depression, inflation, create the panic, then rape the nation. Crisis creation, incite black and white, programmed agitation.
Don't resist! You're surrounded by the UN in white and blue, the ATF, the men in black, from the One World Order.
But it's not new. Iron Mountain, computer beast, and cattle mutilations. Black projects, UFOs, and weird genetic combinations. The Nazi doctors didn't die? Come on, get hip. They came here with the OSS through Operation Paperclip. National ID? Debit card? Yeah. Vaccination biochip, milk carton kids, genetic engineering. Clinton says her health plans for you and your own good. Sure. And Adolf Hitler's Robin Hood. Masonic mind manipulation, inciting riots, it's crisis creation. Biochip implantation, vaccinate your kid for UN identification.